Good day, everyone. So here's our group, HAJA, and we will be discussing the inventions and discovery in psychology. So first, what is psychology? According to Boyack, Cravens, and Borner of 2005, psychology is the scientific study of the mind and behavior. Psychologists are actively involved in studying and understanding mental processes, brain functions, and behavior. In this lesson, we will be tackling the early century, 19th century, 20th century, and 21st century. For the early century, Ebers Papyrus ancient Egyptian approximately 1550 before Christ. The Ebers Papyrus is among the earliest written sources to include information about health and medicine. It has a compilation of medical texts and contains the first documented reference of psychiatric illnesses, including dementia and depression. Mental Arab Muslims, 705 Common Era. Arab Muslims established the world's first psychiatric hospital in Baghdad, Iraq. Muslims believed that people with mental illness were unable to care for themselves, yet deserved humane treatment and protection. It was Al-Razi who, legend has it, originally advocated the idea of psychiatric hospitals as a facility to treat those suffering from mental disease. He believes that people with mental diseases should be treated as seriously as those with physical ailments. The Anima Brutorum of Thomas Willis, 1672. The Anima Brutorum is a scientific and psychological study of the human mind and nervous system. It includes the earliest medical description of global paralysis, the first investigation into the function of sleep in the human nerve system, and the first study of the psychological states of depression, mania, and stupidity.
In the 19th century, psychology was established as an empirical accepted science. While measures would change, the modelization and evaluation would begin to take shape within this 100-year time span. Wilhelm Wundt in 1879 opens the first psychology laboratory or the first experimental laboratory in psychology at the University of Leipzig, Germany. Credited with establishing psychology as an academic discipline, Wundt's students include Emil Kraepelin, James McIntyre, and G. Stanley Hall. Wundt mainly studied sensations and feelings by employing experimental methods. G. Stanley Hall in 1892 founded the American Psychological Association. It enlisted 26 members in the first meeting and serves as its first president. He later establishes two key journals in the field, American Journal of Psychology in 1887 and Journal of Applied Psychology in 1917. William James in 1890 is an American philosopher and psychologist who trained to be a physician before going into psychology. He publishes the book called The Principles of Psychology. In this book, he argued that the purpose of education is to organize the child's powers of conduct so as to fit him to his social and physical environment. After heading a laboratory at University of Pennsylvania, Leitner Whitmer in 1896 opens world's first psychological clinic to patients, shifting his focus from experimental work to practical application of his findings. There, he developed new approaches for the assessment, treatment, and education of children. Whitmer adopted interdisciplinary approaches, utilizing nurses, physicians, psychologists, social workers, teachers, and others, all working at his clinic.
Moving on, we are now in the 20th century. In the 1900s, Sigmund Freud published The Interpretation of Dreams, marking the beginning of psychoanalytic thought. Freud said that the interpretation of dreams is the royal road to a knowledge of the unconscious activities of the mind. He meant that because dreams are such an unconscious activity, they give an almost direct insight into the workings of the unconscious mind concerning more on the psychosexual development of an individual. In 1951, Lee Cronbach wrote about his measure of reliability, now known as Cronbach's alpha. Cronbach's alpha is a way of assessing reliability by comparing the amount of shared variance or covariance among the items making up an instrument to the amount of overall variance. The idea is that if the instrument is reliable, there should be a great deal of covariance among the items relative to the variance. This is mostly used in forming survey questions in the psychological researches. In 1970, magnetic resonance imaging or MRI is a non-invasive medical imaging test that produces detailed images of almost every internal structure in the human body, including the organs, bones, muscles, and blood vessels. MRI scanners create images of the body using a large magnet and radio wave. This is invented by Raymond Damadian, MD. Lastly, in 20th century, we have the inventory of Michael M. Merzenich in 1988, wherein he showed that the sensory and motor maps in the cortex can be modified with experiences, wherein a process called neuroplasticity, also known as neural plasticity or brain plasticity. It is a process that involves adaptive, structural, and functional changes to the brain.
The last part of our discussion would be the 21st century. Next, in the working memory model of Alan Baddeley in 2000. The working memory model is a multi-component system that manipulates information storage for larger and more advanced cognitive value as opposed to the basic functions of short-term memory in enabling short-term storage of information. Next, next would be the blank slate, the modern denial of human nature of Steven Pinker in 2002. It is the best-selling 2002 book by cognitive psychologist Steven Pinker, in which he presents a case against tabula rasa models in the social sciences, suggesting that evolutionary psychologist adoptions impact human behavior significantly. So second to the last would be the prospect theory of Daniel Kahneman in 2002. The prospect theory, also known as the loss aversion theory, describes how people make decisions when given with alternatives involving risk, probability, and uncertainty. And according to this theory, people make decisions based on perceived losses and gains. So lastly, would be the discovery of place cells of John O'Keefe in 2014. For both human and animals, being aware of one's location and knowing how to get to other places is significant. John O'Keefe investigated the movements of rats and the signals coming from nerve cells in the hippocampus, a region in the center of the brain, to comprehend the capacity to orient oneself in space. He discovered that kapag ang isang daga ay nasa isang lugar lang, may certain cells na gumagalaw or na-activate. Tapos kapag lumipat yung isang daga sa isang place, mayroon panibagong cells na na-activate. So, kaya doon nagmula yung discovery of place cells ni John O'Keefe. So, that's all for our discussion in science, technology, and society.